So, haunted asylums are pretty popular, and it's not hard to see why. These sites, especially the older ones, were often the site of a lot of death and general misery. So, it's not hard to see why paranormal enthusiasts might think there are spirits there who couldn't move on from the trauma of their deaths. A while back, someone mentioned Georgia's Central State Hospital in my comments. I finally decided to look into it and thought I would share what I found with all of you guys. So, let's talk about it. So, just to start out, there is a bit of contradictory information surrounding the hospital's history. This isn't too uncommon in a lot of the topics I research, especially things that happened decades or even centuries ago when some of the records might have been lost to time. There are also a lot of incidents and happenings where no specific date was given, only the decade. I'm not sure why this was done, but I will do my best to give you the information that I found. So I found three separate addresses for the hospital. One is 7 Martin Luther King Jr. Drive. Another is 2450 Vinson Highway. When you go to Google Maps, the only location they have listed for Central State is at 620 Broad Street, which was another address listed by a few sources. I'm not sure exactly why there are so many different addresses listed. I have a couple theories. Either one, the campus was so big that different buildings often had different addresses. Two, some of the buildings often relocated, or three, a bit of both. The hospital opened in 1842 as Georgia Lunatic Asylum. Until 1866, they admitted white patients only. By 1870, 1/6 of the patients were black, and unsurprisingly, patients were segregated by race. In 1897, the hospital was renamed Georgia State Sanitarium. In 1870, the hospital superintendent, Dr. Everts, reported bad conditions to Georgia's Governor Rufus Bullock. He claimed the buildings weren't properly heated, lit, or ventilated, that there were a lot of leaks, rotten floors, roaches in the kitchen, and that people were sleeping on straw beds. All these problems were blamed on insufficient funding, and the hospital started to receive more money, but conditions didn't exactly improve. By 1904, the hospital had an average of just under 3,000 patients a day. Many were admitted for reasons that might sound odd today. Things like disappointed affection, religious excitement, domestic unhappiness, and ill health and jealousy. I'm not sure if these were euphemisms or maybe outdated medical terms, or if they sounded weird even a century ago. There were rumors that people got sent to Central State for things like smoking pot and being in interracial relationships. Parents in the area would threaten misbehaving children by telling them they would send them to Milledgeville if they didn't straighten up. Milledgeville is the city where the hospital was located. I probably should have said that from the start. In the early 1900s, the hospital asked for more government funding to build a tuberculosis wing, since a lot of patients were dying from the disease. There was also contaminated water that was causing typhoid, so they asked for a new water supply. By 1940, the hospital had been renamed Milledgeville State Hospital and held about 10,000 patients. Just 20 years later, it had swelled to its peak at 12,000, and the patient-doctor ratio was 100 to 1. By the 1960s, 1/4 of the doctors on staff struggled with alcoholism or drug abuse, and none of them were psychiatrists. In 1952, Peter G. Cranford, the hospital's chief clinical psychologist, published his book, For the Grace of God. The book details the history and goings-on of Central State up to that point. It's been out of print for a while, but around 2009, it was packaged together with another book in a mini collection called Damnation Hospital. Amazon calls both books together the two most exhaustive looks at Central State's early history. I will leave some links below if you want to check it out. In the meantime, Central State wasn't exactly employing the most ethical practices. Lobotomies, straitjackets, shock therapy, and ice baths were all used. Children were put in metal cages, and adults were forced to take steam baths and cold showers. which I'm sure were far different than the sauna-like conditions those words bring to mind. Surgeries were often performed without a doctor even being present, let alone operating. Homicides, suicides, and accidental deaths due to patient neglect or abuse also happened. Another issue the staff had to deal with in the mid-1900s was forced sterilization. Georgia enacted a law in 1937 that made this practice legal, and many doctors and politicians of the day supported it. It didn't end until 1963, by which point over 3,000 people in Georgia had been forcibly sterilized. 3/4 of them were psychiatric patients. I don't know for sure if this practice was carried out at Central State, but there is a pretty good chance it was. In the 1960s, Georgia's Governor Carl Sanders started moving patients to homes that would suit them better. He was aided by Jimmy Carter, who at the time was a Georgia state senator, and of course went on to become the 39th U.S. president from 1977 to 1981. In 1967, the hospital was renamed Central State Hospital. In my research, I also came across a lawsuit from 1978. A Central State employee was injured on the job in 1971 and filed for workers' comp. Then in 1977, standing at work all day caused her feet to swell, which was a consequence of her earlier injury. Workers' comp and lawsuits are things a lot of companies have to deal with, and I don't think this necessarily means anything on its own. But with everything else going on at this point at Central State, it doesn't look too good for them. Central State was added to the National Register of Historic Places in 1978. By this point, a lot of the buildings were falling into disrepair, and some of them had to be destroyed because they were deemed unsafe. The patient abuse continued into the 1990s and even the 2000s. A 2007 report said 42 Central State patients had died under mysterious circumstances over the previous 5 years. Journalists continued to expose patient abuse, and government officials slowly agreed to change things. So sources vary on when Central State closed. One source said it closed in 2010, but another said it was set to close in 2013. The hospital is actually still in operation, though it houses less than 200 patients as of 2015, and only one, maybe 2 or 3 buildings are still in operation. Central State today is described as a forensics facility, as well as a residential living center for people with behavioral health disorders. Its address is also listed at 2450 Vincent Highway, which is one of the addresses listed earlier. The building that used to be the hospital's train station was turned into a museum at one point, but I don't think it's still open. In fact, most of the hospital campus's 200 buildings on 2,000 acres of land now lay abandoned and falling apart. Visiting them is technically considered trespassing, so I would advise you not to go there. Besides, there are plenty of videos of people visiting the old campus that allow you to experience the ruins from the comfort of your own home. In 2019, a project was launched to turn the old Central State campus and surrounding area into Renaissance Park. Their mission is, according to their website, to develop long-term strategies for repurposing the former Central State Hospital campus by identifying potential business opportunities and coordinating the development of the property with a focus on job creation, education, and real estate value for the community. There's not much more information about specific buildings or projects, but I'll leave a link to their website if you would like to keep up with things. So, given Central State's dark history, it's not a surprise that there are rumors of paranormal activity on the grounds. Reports include apparitions, disembodied voices in the area, screams coming from abandoned buildings, phantom touches, breathing on the back of people's necks, and even rumors of demonic rituals. 2 women who visited the grounds claimed that someone or something was throwing things at them from inside on the upper floors while they were outside. A member of another group claimed to feel a sudden chill, which is something pretty common with ghosts. Yet another member of that group reported the smell of rotting flesh, which, according to them, is a sign of demonic activity. I've never heard this before, but it might be true, or at least a common belief. There's also a cemetery nearby that holds the remains of 25,000 people, many of them in unmarked graves. Nearby, Cedar Lane Cemetery holds 2,000 bodies, I believe, in addition to this. I haven't found information about hauntings associated with these particular areas, but I thought it was worth mentioning. So one last thing before we go, and this isn't related to Central State specifically, but I thought it was worth bringing up. While I was writing the script for this video, I coincidentally started reading a book called Asylum by Amy Krauss. I can't really show you a copy because I'm reading it on my Kindle, but I'll put a picture up here to show you what the cover looks like. It is fiction, but takes place in a mental hospital that may or may not be haunted, which is obviously similar to Central State. I just started this book about a week ago. I'm around 70% done with it, and it's not bad. And as a writer myself, I like to take any opportunity I can to shout out other authors. So if hearing about Central State has left you with an appetite to hear more stories about haunted mental hospitals, I will leave a link to that book below. So that's all I have for you today on Central State Hospital. In a lot of ways, this story is pretty typical of other haunted mental hospitals, but I had no idea things went on as long as they did. There was still patient abuse happening in my lifetime, and the lifetime of a lot of my viewers, I'm sure. If you're from the Milledgeville area and have more insight on Central State, I would love to hear it in the comments. Sometimes locals have a perspective on things that the internet and books just don't. And of course, even if you're not from the area, I would still love to know what you think. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like and share it. And for more dark content, I hope you'll consider subscribing and hitting that bell. Thanks for watching and have a creepy day. Bye guys.